People turning south from the freeway were startled when they saw 3 flying saucers.
Turn off your electrode gun! No!
I can't get it, it's jammed!
Grab him, you fool! That was too close.
Ed Wood is best known as the writer-director of the 1957 camp classic Plan 9 from Outer Space, which is famous for being named the worst film of all time. But Ed Wood's personal life was more outlandish than anything in any of his lousy movies.
From time to time, he did put on Angora sweater. I know that, in front of us. He felt that it comforted him. I don't get it, but he obviously did.
Put it bluntly, I just think he loved to dress as a woman.
I just told people that I'd starred in a few B pictures. I never mentioned that I had lived with a transvestite. You know, I hid that.
On this episode of Mysteries and Scandals, we'll explore the tragedy of Ed Wood, a man who gave new meaning to the term schlock.
Oh my God, he doesn't make A movies, he doesn't make B movies, he makes Z movies.
He thought he was doing Orson Welles. I think he was just that deluded.
Hollywood's a hard place, to me. You've got to take it or leave it the way it comes. Because if you don't, it can kill you.
I'm A.J. Benza. Join me as we explore the life of Ed Wood, bad director, closet transvestite, Hollywood casualty. But he was also a man who personified the Hollywood dream. Hey, if you're intrigued by the bizarre side of Tinseltown, then this is one you don't want to miss. In 1983, 5 years after Ed Wood died in abject poverty, he was awarded a Golden Turkey Prize as the worst director of all time. But Ed Wood never set out to win that dubious distinction. Edward Davis Wood, Jr. was born on October 10, 1924 in Poughkeepsie, New York, to middle-class parents Lillian and Edward Davis Wood, Sr. Actress Mila Nurmi, TV's Vampira, knew Ed Wood.
Ed Wood grew up to be a product of his mother's frustrated wish for a little girl. She actually collected dolls, and I think he was just her largest, most living doll.
Actress Dolores Fuller was Ed Wood's girlfriend for 4 years.
I believe his mother put him in a little bunting outfit that had the Angora fur. He never forgot the sensuous feelings that he got out of it.
We'll get back to Ed's Angora fetish a little later on. In 1931, at the age of 7, Wood saw his first movie, Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi.
I am Dracula.
The film terrorized and mesmerized young Ed. Wood later told friends that it was Lugosi's performance in Dracula that inspired him to be a motion picture director.
He went every Saturday afternoon and spent the entire day in the movie house. Of course, built his dreams largely on what he saw on the screen.
Actor Paul Marco was a close friend of Ed Wood for 3 decades.
So he was a real, I hate the word freak, he was a real, loved those pictures.
And that ultimately put a ring through his nose and drew him to Hollywood.
But first things first. In 1942, at the height of World War II, 18-year-old Wood enlisted in the Marines and was stationed in the South Pacific. But Ed kept a secret from his fellow Marines. Oscar-winning actor Martin Landau starred in a film about the infamous director.
He said, if I'm shot, I hope they kill me, because he was wearing pink panties under his Marine Corps uniform. And if they wounded him, they'd undress him. And if they killed him, they wouldn't.
Wood's secret remained safe, and he was honorably discharged from the Marines in 1947. 23-year-old Ed needed a new line of work, but had only one marketable skill: fast fingers.
Eddie won a typing contest for the fastest typist in New York. Never in my life have I known anyone that typed as fast.
Okay, so Wood was a hit in the secretarial pool, but he dreamed of becoming a movie director. So in 1948, the 24-year-old moved to Hollywood. He found a night job at Universal Studios typing up the next day's production schedules. By day, he wrote original screenplays.
He was consumed day and night, his concentration on making films.
After a couple of years, 26-year-old Wood was still looking for his big break. Instead, in 1950, Ed Wood found a soulmate.
Eddie had put an ad in looking for an actress that he could groom for leading parts. In the interview, I wore an Angora sweater. So I had it all over the other girls because I didn't know at the time Eddie had a fetish for Angora. This happens to be one of the ones that he wore when he was writing scripts at night.
Ed and Dolores fell in love and moved in together. Dolores knew Wood was a little eccentric, but had no idea just how weird Ed really was.
But I did catch him with a prettier pair of underpanties on than even I had, lace panties. And of course, at the time, we were getting ready to make love, and we just wanted to get him off.
In 1953, Ed Wood finally scored professionally, too. Producer George Weiss gave Ed Wood the money to write, direct, and star in a quickie movie. The project was a fictionalized version of the Christine Jorgensen story. Jorgensen was an American man who made headlines earlier that year when he had one of the very first sex change operations.
Glenn and Glenda, I mean, that's like 4 films in one. It's a documentary, it's a sort of soft porn with amazingly silly sex scenes with girls writhing, and then it's a drama too, and it's hilarious.
Making Glenn or Glenda was a dream come true for Ed Wood. Wood even convinced famed horror idol Bela Lugosi to star. By this time, 71-year-old Lugosi was drug addicted and desperate for work. During the filming of the movie, the two struck up a deep friendship. Cult magazine creator Buddy Barnett.
Glenn or Glenda was a totally autobiographical film. Ed Wood was really putting his life on the line.
Wood played the title role of Glenn, who puts on nylons and a wig and becomes Glenda.
Give this man satin undies, a dress, a sweater, and a skirt, or even the lounging outfit he has on, and he's the happiest individual in the world. He can work better, think better, he can play better, and he can be more of a credit to his community and his government because he is happy. These things are his comfort.
His girlfriend, Dolores Fuller, at the time, she was co-starring in the movie, and she did not even know that this was his life story, because at that time he hadn't revealed to her that he was dressing in, women's clothes.
Glenn, is it another woman?
It took a lot of courage for him to reveal that he was a transvestite. So this was his way of telling me. And when I saw the whole picture with the wigs and all the women's clothes, I just wanted to crawl into the seat of the theater.
Ed Wood's girlfriend wasn't the only one who hated the movie Glenn or Glenda. The film bombed during previews and never found major distribution. Coming up, Ed Wood drops another bomb on Hollywood, and you won't believe this one. In 1953, 29-year-old director Ed Wood cast himself as the cross-dressing lead in a movie called Glenn or Glenda. You got to remember, this was a time when transvestites were stuck in rubber rooms with straitjackets. Wood's girlfriend, Dolores Fuller, was willing to accept Wood's idiosyncrasies, provided his penchant for women's clothes remained their little secret.
He told me that Glenn or Glenda would never be seen anywhere. He promised that he would never let anyone else know. He promised that that would be a secret between us.
Glenn or Glenda was a flop, but Ed persisted. His next film was the 1954 picture Bride of the Monster. Wood once again cast his friend Bela Lugosi, but 72-year-old Bela was ill, totally broke, and the bank had just taken his house.
I have no home. Hunted. Despised. Living like an animal.
Wood knew what it felt like to be an outcast and wrote Bela's role with this in mind. Bride of the Monster also featured unintentional humor. including a giant rubber octopus that was supposed to devour Lugosi at the end of the movie. Paul Marco played Kelton the cop in Bride of the Monster.
Well, you all heard about the octopus. We did steal it from Republic Studios. And it was the middle of the night, and Eddie did forget the motor. So Eddie says, well, Baylor, what are we going to do? He says, leave it to me.
The octopus scene in Bride of the Monster, there was no sound. So they had a loop. If you ever watched the movie, they had a loop of Lugosi going, ah, 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 ah.
You think shooting Bride of the Monster was ridiculous? Wait until you hear how Ed Wood celebrated finishing the film.
When we had our first big fight was at the cast party of Bride of the Monster. And he went into the women's dressing room and came out with a belly dancer outfit. And it was just too much for me. I said, you promised that you wouldn't let anyone else know. To me, that was a betrayal.
After 4 years with Ed, Dolores Fuller had had enough.
There was a terrible scene when I broke it off. He came home very drunk. So he started screaming and crying, Dolores, I love you, let me in. The next picture will be better. I just wanted to leave and go on to better things.
Dolores Fuller did go on to a career in music. Fuller wrote 17 songs for Elvis Presley, including Rock-a-Hula Baby, Spin Out, and I Got Lucky. Ladies' man Ed Wood went on as well. A few months after Dolores dumped him, 31-year-old Wood met the woman he would marry, Norma McCarty.
It was in 1955, and we just got along good, and as I said, had so much in common that Ed and I were married in October of 1955 on a soundstage. It was lovely.
But Ed Wood's marriage to Norma McCarty would turn out to be another fashion faux pas. He never told Norma about his lust for ladies' lingerie. Up next, Ed Wood cons a Baptist church into putting up the money for his next giant blockbuster, the worst movie of all time.
Because all you of Earth are idiots. You just hold on, Buster.
In 1955, 31-year-old Hollywood film director Ed Wood kept his fetish for cross-dressing a closely guarded secret. Wood's brand new bride, Norma McCarty, had no idea why she kept coming home and finding her underthings in disarray.
I'd find my nightgown on the bed when I come home from work. And I thought, well, I didn't wear that last night, you know. So, but it never dawned on me that he might be wearing these things.
Then one night in January 1956, about 8 weeks after their wedding, the lingerie hit the fan.
Bela Lugosi called me one night and said, Eddie is here and he's drinking. I asked him why he went out and drank too much. And he says, I'm a transvestite. I said, well, what is that?
And I think Norma was very religious and completely against that. And even though she knew Ed wasn't gay, I just think that it wasn't for her.
The first thing I said was, I can't live with you. You know, I mean, it was such a shocker.
Ed Wood remained in Norma's apartment after she moved out, but he was too broke to pay the rent. In the spring of 1956, Wood was about to get kicked out in the street. His landlord, Ed Reynolds, was a leading member of the local Baptist church, and guess what? Reynolds wanted to get into the movie business. Actor Gregory Walcott was friends with Ed Reynolds.
And he felt led of God to come to California, to Hollywood, to make biblical epics.
But Ed told him, hey, you got to make exploitation movies before you can make religious movies.
Thinking that Wood was heaven sent, Reynolds stopped charging him rent. In September 1956, Reynolds agreed to bankroll Wood's next film.
He came to me all enthused, and he said, Gregory, I'm going to make a motion picture with Bela Lugosi as a star. I said, but Ed, Bela Lugosi's dead. He said, oh, that's not a problem. That's not a problem. There's a very ingenious young writer-director named Ed Wood who has some footage of Bela Lugosi.
Ingenious? Insane is more like it. Wood actually thought he could intercut old footage of Bela Lugosi with new footage of a look-alike and no one would notice. Mila Nurmi co-starred in the would-be epic.
Somebody came to my door and said, Mila, Edward D. Wood wants you in a film, and it's called Grave Robbers from Outer Space. I thought, gee, that's a pretty neat title. I really like that title.
When the Baptists who were financing the film took offense to the idea of grave robbing, the title was changed to Plan 9 from Outer Space.
This was not the typical Hollywood production. Ed Wood's cronies, I call them his menagerie. And I said to my wife, I said, honey, I'm afraid I'm working on the worst film ever made.
Maybe, but Wood only had 4 days to shoot the picture, so he didn't have time to sweat the details.
I mean, if it was anywhere near the lens, you know, gravestones falling down, and you know, no one will notice. It was amazing. You know, as I say, he put it together with chewing gum and spit. But he was so limited with the amount of film he had. With a halfway decent film, you could do a few takes.
He was not exactly Elia Kazan. He would just say, Vampira, stand over there and walk to the camera. Walk to the camera. Actually, I was 15 minutes on camera. It was that famous 15 minutes, I guess, that Andy Warhol spoke of.
It was just kind of hard for me to keep from laughing. It was just that ludicrous. I became a little angry. He says, I know my script. I know my script. And I thought, well, I'm glad you do, Ed, because I'm not understanding a whole lot what's going on.
Paul Marco reprised his role of Kelton the cop in Plan 9.
Things didn't work out on Plan 9 that they should have because of the Baptist people, the way they're bossing him around. And I was very mad at him that he gave them the right, I felt.
Unfortunately, Paul Marco and Ed Wood were alone in caring so deeply for the fate of Plan 9.
I was prophetic, and my assessment came true because the film was terrible. It was just that bad, just that bad.
You see? You see? Your stupid minds. Stupid! Stupid! That's all I'm taking from you. Get back!
Ed Wood never found a distributor for Plan 9, and the failure of his pet project crushed him.
He was always enthusiastic, except when a film was finished and if it couldn't get distribution and there was no money for the rent, and all kinds of realities would come in and make him depressed. But when the project was in progress, he was elated. He was probably bipolar, I would say.
And by this time, a full-fledged drunk. After the fiasco of Plan 9 in 1957, Wood did make several other pictures, all dismal failures. By the early 1960s, Ed Wood could no longer find any money for his projects. His life was a Hollywood nightmare. Was there any hope for Wood to find acceptance and success before it was too late?
I can't make sense to myself sometimes.
Film director Ed Wood may go down in history as the worst director who ever worked in Hollywood. Was the cross-dressing Wood merely an untalented misfit, or was he really a misunderstood artist? We may never fully understand what demons drove Ed Wood to an early death, but we do know that by 1968, 44-year-old Wood was desperate. After 21 years of trying, Ed failed to make it in Hollywood. To support his cravings for alcohol and Angora, Wood churned out X-rated movies and books by the dozen.
When Eddie became so poverty-stricken, the only things he knew how to do was write, make movies, and the only kind of movies he could make would be porno movies. So he was reduced to that, very sadly.
By the early 1970s, Wood even began to appear in his own porno films, mostly for comic relief. Even so, Wood looked as though he was intentionally humiliating himself.
He prances around a little bit, and You know, he looks bloated because of alcoholism.
It was one of those sleazy things, I don't know its name, but it was one of those, and there was Ed dressed in an Angora sweater and fat and drunk and sloppy, and oh, it was dreadful. He was falling apart.
Finally, in 1978, Wood hit rock bottom.
He couldn't come up with the rent, and the rent was about $35, and Ed couldn't even come up with $35.
2 weeks after his eviction on December 10, 1978, Ed Wood died of a heart attack. He was only 54 years old.
I prayed for him because somebody told me that he looked like, the look on his face was like he had seen the devil. He really died of a broken heart and disappointment.
Here went one of my beautiful and broken children. When I seem as if I'm not concerned with the real issues, but I am. When I see a real human tragedy, and this was a human tragedy.
In 1993, 15 years after Ed Wood's death, Tim Burton directed the film Ed Wood, which made Wood a cult figure.
He was creating art, and he got these people all excited. You know, he wasn't John Ford, and he wasn't John Huston, and he wasn't Alfred Hitchcock, but he thought he was. And that's kind of wonderful.
Since his death in 1978, Wood's work is finally enjoying the acclaim he so desperately craved.
At the end of his life, he was this disastrous failure, and then after his death, this resurgence, this rebirth.
I think he would have gladly taken on the mantle of world's worst director if it made him so famous.
I feel that Eddie still is looking down on us.
Ed Wood never did get a star on this boulevard of broken dreams, but even though he was once rejected by Tinseltown, Ed Wood's memory is now celebrated. And wherever he went, he's probably still wearing something soft and silky. I'm A.J. Benza. Join me the next time we take a stroll down the flip side of the Hollywood Walk of Fame.